So when we're talking about building in the cloud, we're using tools like Terraform to create things at an absolutely blistering pace. But, that kind of speed, it comes with risk. So let's dive into HashiCorp Sentinel and see how it gives us the automated guardrails we need to manage that risk, embedding safety right into the way we work. And this, right here, this is the big question every single modern engineering team is wrestling with. We are moving faster than ever before, right? We're deploying infrastructure as code, which is amazing for innovation. But it also means a tiny mistake, a single line of code, can have huge consequences. So how do you balance that incredible speed with the absolute non-negotiable need for safety and control? So that leads us right into what you could call the automation dilemma. It's this constant tug of war. On one side, you've got the speed and agility from tools like Terraform. And on the other, you have all the traditional governance, security, and compliance stuff, which is usually manual, slow, and honestly feels like it just gets in the way. Without the right system in place, these two are always going to be fighting each other. And look, these risks aren't just some abstract idea. We're talking about real-world stuff. A developer could accidentally launch a monster server that completely blows the monthly budget. Or maybe they create a new data bucket but forget to turn on encryption. These are the everyday slip-ups that, when you automate them at scale, can turn into major security incidents or massive financial headaches. Okay, so what's the fix here? Well, it's this really cool concept called policy as code. The whole idea is to start treating your governance rules, your security policies, compliance requirements, cost controls, all of it, the exact same way you treat your infrastructure. You write them down as code. So let's break that down. What does policy as code actually mean? It means your rules now live in a repository, just like your Terraform files. You can version them in Git, you can test them in a CI/CD pipeline, and you can apply them automatically every single time somebody tries to make a change. This completely flips governance on its head. It stops being a manual checklist at the end of the line and becomes an automated guardrail right at the very beginning. And that right there is the perfect way to think about where Sentinel, our main topic today, fits into the picture. If policy as code is the big idea, then Sentinel is HashiCorp's specific tool to make it happen. It's the framework they built from the ground up to plug right into Terraform, Vault, Consul, and Nomad, and enforce all those policies we just talked about. All right, so how does this thing actually work? Under the hood. How does a simple line of policy code end up making a real decision to either block or allow a change to your infrastructure? It all follows a really simple and clear workflow. It really just boils down to these 3 steps. First, you define your rules in special files that end with .sentinel, simple enough. Second, whenever a developer runs something like a Terraform plan, Sentinel automatically executes those policies against all the proposed changes. And third, based on what it finds, Sentinel decides on an outcome. And that final decision, it can be one of 3 things. A pass is easy, everything looks good, the change goes through. A hard fail is also pretty straightforward. A critical rule was broken, so the action is stopped dead in its tracks. But the soft fail is where things get really interesting and flexible. It logs a warning to let you know something isn't quite right, but it doesn't actually block the process. This flexibility is really what makes Sentinel so powerful. It's built into what they call 3 enforcement levels. You can ease into it. Start with advisory mode, which is kind of like that soft fail. It just logs violations so you can see where your issues are without bugging anyone. Then, you can graduate to soft mandatory, which will actually block changes but lets an admin override it in an emergency. And finally, for your most critical, must-have rules, you use hard mandatory. No exceptions, no overrides, period. Okay, theory is great and all, but let's get to the good stuff. What does this look like in the real world? This is where Sentinel really starts to make sense, by setting up actual guardrails for things you deal with every day. We're going to look at a few classic examples: security, cost control, and compliance. Okay, so here's our first chunk of code. Now, don't get bogged down in the syntax here. The main thing to see is that this policy is looking at all the AWS security groups in a Terraform plan. And specifically, it's checking the rules for incoming traffic. So what does that blob of code do? Well, here's the magic. It translates to a super simple but incredibly powerful security guarantee. It automatically prevents one of the most common and dangerous mistakes you can make in the cloud: accidentally opening up a server to the entire internet, which is what that 0.0.0.0/0 address represents. Let's try another one. This time, let's talk about controlling costs. Here, we're creating a little list of server sizes that we're okay with. In this case, just the small T3.micro and T3.small ones. The main rule, then, just checks every new server to make sure its type is on our approved list. And the payoff for this one? It's crystal clear. This simple policy is basically a financial guardrail. It stops developers, whether they mean to or not, from spinning up huge, expensive machines, especially in a dev environment. This helps keep your cloud bill predictable and saves you from those nasty end-of-the-month surprises. All right, one last example, and this one's all about compliance. This policy is incredibly simple, but so important. All it does is go through every single resource that Terraform is about to create and asks one question. Does this thing have a tag called owner? You see? This is a perfect way to enforce those basic company rules that everyone's supposed to follow. We've all seen it. Untagged resources are a total nightmare when you're trying to figure out who owns what or which department to bill. This policy makes sure that every single piece of infrastructure has a clear owner from the moment it's born, building accountability right into your workflow. Okay, so we've seen some pretty cool examples of what Sentinel can do. Now, let's pull back a bit and look at the big picture. Sentinel doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? So it's important to understand where it fits in the wider world of tools and, what the trade-offs are. Now, when you talk about Sentinel, you're almost always going to hear about its biggest alternative, a tool called Open Policy Agent, or OPA. This table really nails the key differences. The main thing to remember is this. Sentinel is purpose-built for the HashiCorp world. It gives you that deep native integration. OPA, on the other hand, is more of a general-purpose Swiss Army knife kind of tool. It's vendor-neutral, and you see it a lot in places like Kubernetes. So let's wrap up the good stuff. Sentinel's real superpower is just how tightly it's woven into the HashiCorp workflow. If your team lives and breathes HashiCorp tools, Sentinel gives you this perfectly seamless and consistent way to apply governance everywhere. It's the ultimate policy as code dream, and it logs every single decision so you always have a full audit trail. But hey, nothing's perfect, right? There are definitely some things to keep in mind. First off, Sentinel is a proprietary feature. It only comes with HashiCorp's paid enterprise products, so it's not open source. It's also, by its very design, laser-focused on the HashiCorp ecosystem. And its custom policy language, well, it's something new your team will have to learn. So if you remember just one thing from all of this, let it be this key takeaway. Sentinel completely changes the game for governance. It takes it from being this reactive, manual checklist that happens way too late and transforms it into a proactive, automated, and preventative system that's just part of how you build things. And that brings us to one final question I want to leave you with. As your own infrastructure gets bigger and more complex, and the speed of change just keeps getting faster, are your old manual checks and review meetings really enough? Are your guardrails actually keeping up with your automation?